Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they?
Oderberg, Fleischmann and I got the Ostbahn train to the Albenhaven, and then we were walking quickly towards the Danube. It was raining. Oderberg, for all the age difference, was ahead of me, and we were both following a crazy man. Since we'd taken Mass, I'd surprised myself how easily childhood training had taken over. Oderberg had been like a man possessed. He was convinced the priest knew where the vampires slept. We'd gone to the central cemetery looking for the male, and now it seemed that we were after a woman, perhaps Margaret Vesey, but perhaps the other one, the so-called Rosenrot. And the thought of that set up an ache in me. She wasn't a real woman, I knew that. She was the echo of the eternal, dark, blood-sucking woman in every man's head, and outside my head, because I'd seen her, and my bones yearned, because I wanted to see her again. The rain came down straight. My hat was wet. My coat was wet. "I am your shadow," Rosenrot had said, and I kept looking round for her, partly afraid, partly eager, but today wasn't a good day for shadows, not unless they could swim. We were quite a way out from the centre of Vienna. This was an industrial district of harbours, railways and refineries, and the barges floated on the Danube just ahead of us. There was no one about in this downtrodden wasteland of rusted metal and weed-ruined walls. Fleischmann, in sodden black, strode ahead, behind him Oderberg, pegging along, then me, wishing I had time to stop and light a cigarette. Der Friedhof der Namenlosen, the cemetery of the nameless. We stood outside it. Fleischmann had waited for us beside some plain-looking gates. He said, "This cemetery is for those no one loves or cares about. The graves are those of people dragged out of the Danube. Drunks, suicides, people whose identity matters to no one." He gestured grandly, "except to God. He never forgets even these." After the dramatic pause, we entered the cemetery. It was much, much smaller than the central cemetery. We walked down the simple path past rows of graves, each with cheap city-produced crosses. There was a forest of these mass-produced memorials, and on most of them the words namenlos, or unbekannt, nameless, unknown. The atmosphere was heavy. I almost felt the despair of those people who, through accident or design, consigned themselves to the dark, unforgiving water of the Danube. I tried to strike a match. 3 failed, the rain having soaked through my coat and into my pocket. That did nothing for my temper. I was already on edge. Fleischmann said she was here, and I hated being this close to them, even in their sleep. The priest leaned close to Oderberg, eyes shining with madness, voice pitched far too high for the hush of rain. At last I coaxed a match to flare and lit the cigarette. The smoke curled, but even the smell of American tobacco couldn't cover the reek of wet leaves and rot rising from the trees. "Are you ready, soldiers of Christ?" Fleischmann grinned, as if this were a Catholic boys' club outing. I tried to hear a hint of irony in his tone, some trace of mockery. But from what little I knew of him, I doubted he had much in the way of self-awareness. He reached under his soaked black overcoat and produced a stake and a mallet. I might have laughed, if I hadn't carried the same things myself more than once. God only knew how much he truly understood. Likely his knowledge went no further than what Bram Stoker had put in Dracula. The professor let him take the lead. I couldn't tell whether it was because he really thought Fleischmann had some right to command, or because he was simply too worn down to argue. The burst of energy he'd shown in the church was gone. He stood at the priest's side, head lowered like a man barely clinging on. Being close to them always drained him. I wondered what state he'd be in when he learned the truth about his wife. He looked grim and grey, colourless as ash, like a man already on his way to a final reckoning. Perhaps he was. Perhaps we all were. I thought of Tasmin, the gawky English manners, the nerves underneath. I didn't know why she came to mind then. Maybe because I was thinking about dying and about the things I hadn't done, like loving her. It would have been kind, but I've never known anyone who could order their heart around. It just does what it wants, right or wrong. I shook it off. Thinking about death never helped much with living. Still, the cigarette trembled in my hand. I said, "Come on, I'm getting wet. Let's do something." Father Fleischmann was still grinning, stake and hammer in his hands. He looked at me like I was dirt on his boot, then turned to Oderberg, a man he probably thought was more on his intellectual level. I pulled at the professor's arm, trying to rouse him from the weight pressing him down. "Come on, Prof, let's get it done. I'm freezing. Why don't vampires ever haunt the Riviera? I could handle a case in Nice." Oderberg shook his head and shrugged. "No, Christian, I am not leading here." He gave me a thin smile. "Father Fleischmann knows where she is. We must defer to him." He'd really lost it. I wished Tasmin were there. She seemed to keep him steady. Fleischmann spoke. "Come with me, do exactly what I say." So we trudged deeper into the cemetery. Half an hour later, still wandering up and down among the same rows of the dead, I said, "You don't have a fucking clue where you're going, do you? This place isn't even that big." I used the language because I was wet through, my cigarette had drowned, and mostly because he was a priest and I knew it would sting. It did. He hated me. If I'd ever held the illusion that the church was built on love, that might have unsettled me. As it was, his bottomless dislike struck me as a kind of gift. Maybe it would earn him a few extra lashes on his back in the privacy of his cell. Oderberg looked displeased. It was plain he'd had some kind of religious experience back in the church. From the look he gave me, and then the little apologetic glance he threw at the black-robed maggot, I half wondered if he was thinking of cutting me out of his will in the priest's favour. Significantly, Fleischmann said nothing, because he knew nothing. I shook my head. "You don't know where this grave is, do you?" It was getting dark, not sudden, but creeping in, as if it were hours later than it was. I checked my watch, 3 o'clock, June, and the dark was coming on too soon, slick and sudden like oil spilled over the day. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to smack Fleischmann. My shirt clung to my back, and my hat dripped. Fleischmann stayed silent, so I turned to go. I half looked back at Oderberg. "Hotel London when you need me, you know the number." I jabbed a thumb at the priest. "Don't bring this joker." Then Fleischmann shouted, "Over there! The tomb is over there!" It sounded like a guess, but I stopped. Oderberg said, "Christian, listen to him." He looked at me with something like pleading in his face. I owed him, so I stayed. Fleischmann stood rigid, jaw locked, eyes wide. Then he moved, striding towards a heap of disturbed earth. No cross marked it. Maybe it was too fresh. I looked at Oderberg. His face was still vacant. By now, this had become almost a habit with us, opening graves. We all knew our parts, only this time we didn't have the magic dagger. My hand went to my holster. Empty. No gun either. I'd lent that to Tasmin, not that she should need it. I knew my gun wouldn't do any good against them, but it would sure have blown a hole in Morello on the unlikely chance that he was hiding down there. Or Fleischmann. We stood there above the mound of earth. Our shoes paddled in the gloop, leaving footsteps as if large children had been playing in the mud. For all that he was our supposed leader, Fleischmann looked terrified. He had his stake and his mallet, and God help us, that was all we had if any of them was down there. At least it was daytime. I glanced at the sky. The light had ebbed further. "Were you planning to dig with your hands?" I said. Fleischmann blinked at me like he'd forgotten I existed. "I'll go and find a spade. Workman's hut's over there." I looked up again. "What time is it?" Oderberg fumbled out his fob watch. "Just after 3. "It's getting dark," I said. Oderberg tilted back his head and looked at the sky. "I don't know why. Maybe a fire somewhere. Smoke blocking the sun." "It's been pissing rain all day," I said. "No fire would burn." "It is the work of the devil," Fleischmann muttered. I sighed. Somehow I knew you'd say that. I walked over to the hut. A row of tools leaned round the back. I only needed one spade. I didn't expect Fleischmann or Oderberg would be doing much digging. They stood watching while I shoveled the wet earth aside, sliding down into the hole and heaving it up over my head. The mud sucked at my boots. The work was slow, back-breaking, but the grave was shallow. 15 minutes maybe, and then I felt the thud through the handle, the dull knock of spade on wood. I was standing on the coffin. I looked up at Oderberg. "So, do we smash it open?" He only shrugged. It is for Father Fleischmann to say. Wilhelm, snap out of it. This turkey doesn't know his ass from his elbow. You've seen what they can do. You've got to take the steak off him. You've got to do it. Oderberg looked strange. Vienna had done something to him. Stripped away the moral certainty he used to wear like armour. He'd always been strong, always sure he was right. But now he seemed gnawed by some secret shame. I had no time for that. I shoveled the last of the earth from the coffin and dug down one side to get at the lid. Plain wood, nothing ornate, the sort of box a city buys in bulk for its nameless dead. The rain kept falling, the light sinking lower. I knew that night would set them free. It shouldn't be night now, not for hours, but it was coming. I looked down at the coffin. If it was to be done, it had better be done quickly. Fleischmann looked worse than Oderberg. His mouth hung open in a half-wit's rictus. He was useless. Come on, Wilhelm, the guy's frozen up. Help me, come on. Fleischmann stood with his mouth moving. It took me a moment to realize he was praying. He had left us for a word with God. I only hoped God answered Fleischmann because he'd never answered me. Neither of them was going to help me. I snarled and worked the spade under the coffin lid, leaning all my weight on the handle. The wood shifted. I moved the spade to another spot and levered again. This time the lid almost gave. Another look at the sky, and the daylight was bleeding away by the minute. An early nightfall, as, indeed, the devil himself may have planned it, just like Fleischmann said. It would be faster without the spade. I flung it aside, got my fingers under the lid and hauled. The mud made everything slick, but the cheap wood lifted. No lining, no care, the coffin of someone unwanted, and it was empty. Then, looking up, silhouetted against the fading light, someone had come up to the grave. I thought it was a policeman. How the hell was I going to explain this, standing waist deep in a grave? A familiar voice said, Ach, Odin, you dig for gold, and once again you find nothing. It was Gottfried Engelmann, in the same shabby, plaster-stained suit. What are you doing here? Oderberg said behind me. Engelmann ignored him. They're not here, they're gone. They have made darkness, and they walk in it. I turned to Oderberg. What is he doing here? That was when I noticed Oderberg had the stake and mallet in his hands. Engelmann pointed into the coffin. There's a false bottom, he said. For a moment I just stared at him. The rain hissed, the mud sucked at my boots, and this plaster-stained lunatic stood over me talking riddles. He waited, expectant, like he wanted me to ask him what he meant, as if he were dangling a piece of meat to see if I'd bite. But I'd had enough of his games. I was tired of all this insanity. I picked up the spade. Engelmann continued his babble. I thought I'd get to the end of me if I came here. Engelmann kept going, eyes shining in the half-dark. I thought I'd reach the end of myself if I came here and found him asleep, but he wasn't here. He was inside me. He came up through the bottom of the barrel. He's in all of us. He lives in the oil under the world, black and endless, thick as night. He waits for the cracks in us, seeps through, fills the hollow places. I sighed and looked at Oderberg. Just tell me if you want me to shoot him, I said. It was a joke, but the strings holding my world together were fraying, and I might have done it just to shut him up, to stop the babble clawing at my nerves like fingernails on a blackboard. Engelmann didn't blink. He raised his face to the dark sky. The moon eats the sun, he said softly. That's the order of things. The bright swallowed by the black. An unnatural night had fallen. It was fully night. There is something evil nearby. I sense it, Fleischmann said. I smelled the river, the black water that coughed up its dead, and looked around. Dark, 4 o'clock in June. Maybe an eclipse, Oderberg said, wonder in his voice. The moon has eclipsed the sun. Engelmann intoned. I ignored him. There'd have been something in the paper. People would be talking about it. I hauled myself out of the grave and shouldered past Fleischmann, mud and clay clinging to me. But the dark was thick, unnatural, like ink poured over the world. I found it almost a relief that the trees were still there, the grass and the graves, proof we hadn't been pitched straight into the 9th circle of hell. From the river came the blare of a barge's horn, flat, ordinary, and so far from where we stood, it sounded like it belonged to another world. Engelman squatted on the grass, his coat stretched round him, like some Middle European Buddha gone to seed. He spoke with the air of a man who knew everything, though he was as crazy as an absinthe drinker. Oderberg asked, "You said you dealt in books?" Engelman nodded. "I did, before I became so mad. A shop beneath the river in Prague. I thought too much about things. And what are you doing here in Vienna?" "Like you, I seek the potable gold. I seek the resurrection." Oderberg questioned him as though he were the oracle at Delphi, as if his madness carried some kind of wisdom. To me, it was still gibberish. Oderberg asked, "Why is it so dark? Where are they? Are the two things related?" They need darkness for their work. They must have need of it indeed to walk abroad at this hour." I said, "But how can it be so dark at this time of day? It's against the laws of physics." Engelman smiled at me, inscrutable. "This darkness is made just for us and our loved ones." "So, to the rest of Vienna, it's just another rainy afternoon," I said. "Possibly, yes." "That's nuts," Oderberg said. "What are you doing here, anyway?" Engelman nodded. For the first time, I noticed the pain in his face. "I was waiting for you." I said, "How did you know we'd come?" He frowned, his features twisting as though devils were fighting for space in his skull. Oderberg glared at him. He was a professor, and I guess he was used to getting answers to his questions. Engelman said, "I promise not to say." Oderberg's lip trembled. "I insist you tell me how you knew we would be here." After a while, Engelman looked at him and said, The angel told me." 14. Tasmin Fitzgerald is invited to a reunion. When I came back from my meeting with Morello, Rosa was awake. I sat with her, guilty that I'd left her alone. Wilhelm still hadn't returned, though she didn't ask where he was. She complained of the pains in her head and took a little brandy. I even wished I had a little of Elaine's cocaine to give her to ease her suffering, but instead I read to her. Her English was far from fluent, and my German was almost non-existent, but I thought the sound of my voice might be comforting, like music or the nonsensical rhythm of the waves, so I went to the bookshelves. The shelves held a few volumes in English, but they were mostly heavy things. David Hume, Bishop Berkeley, the Transactions of Learned Societies from America. The only book that might serve was Milton's Paradise Lost. I'd studied it at school and hated it, but perhaps age would improve it. Rosa wouldn't follow the words, but it wasn't the sense that mattered, it was the cadence. We sat together in the armchairs by the window, and I began to read. Rosa was already half asleep, or half somewhere else, drifting in the haze of pain. The light was poor, not what it should have been at 2 on a June afternoon. Rain poured down the glass, streaming in branching rivulets, as if the drops were prisoners making a break for freedom, zigzagging to avoid recapture. The text was hard to read because of the poor light, and I gave up reading and instead listened to the pattering of the rain and the gentle in and out of Rosa's breathing. The little dog Wotan jumped into my lap. My thoughts drifted to Christian and, of course, to Wilhelm, out there in the rain. But the pitter-pattering was soporific, and the light so dim that I almost dozed. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me and turned, expecting it to be Clara. I didn't like the woman. She was coarse and impudent. The coarseness one expected, but the way she wandered through the house as if she owned it showed a total lack of respect for her mistress that I found unforgivable. I was ready to give her a piece of my mind, but it was not Clara. It was Morello. The dog leapt down and growled at him. I caught its collar before he could hurt it. There he stood in his Italian suit, as arrogant as if he owned the place. He smiled his self-satisfied smile. I rose from my chair. "What are you doing here? What right have you to break into another's home like this?" He shrugged. "I was let in." Looking past him, I saw Clara in the shadows by the door. No doubt his looks had easily subverted her. Her kind have little loyalty in any case, though to her credit she looked sheepish. "You invited him in?" I glared at her. She didn't reply, so I shifted my glare to Morello. "What do you want here? Frau Oderberg is ill." "Oh, I know, and am saddened by it, as I am saddened by all unnecessary suffering. My master would never allow such suffering if he was free to choose. He only chastises the stupid and weak, or those arrogant enough to let themselves fall into his hands. Please stop talking this rubbish. What do you want? I want you to come with me. You must be mad. I can't leave Rosa. Rosa has sat here many an hour by herself, or with only her faithful maid for company. You know that the professor is often otherwise occupied, especially right now. That gave me pause. What do you mean, especially now? Where do you want me to go, and why? Questions, always questions. Come to my hotel. The reason will become evident when you are there. I felt the heat rise into my cheeks despite myself. I told you I'm not interested. He said, I think you are interested, but in your English schoolgirl way. You can't admit it to yourself. Anger fled. Who the hell did he think he was? His Italian suit and his gypsy dark hair did not give him the key to my heart, even if Clara had proved an easy conquest. He had misread me. He had overplayed his hand. I think, Signor Morello, that you had better leave now. He only shook his head, still certain of himself. Not without you. It is most important that you come with me. You must think very highly of yourself. No doubt you believe you can win over any woman and bend her to your will. He shrugged. Whatever I think of myself, I am not worthy to wash the feet of the one that comes after me. He stepped closer. Beneath the charm, for the first time, there was threat. Until then, I had never felt physically afraid of him. My hand went to my bag. I hoped he would think it was because I was wavering, considering his invitation. In truth, I wanted to feel the weight of the gun Christian had given me. Come on, he pressed. Come with me now. With the gun at my fingertips, even though he couldn't see it, I felt the balance shift. I smiled. I don't think so, Signor Morello. There is nothing you have that I could want. I will stay here with my sick friend. He smiled. We have Le Cozh. If you want to see him before he dies, you had better come quickly. I beg your pardon. I said it, though I had heard him perfectly. He was bluffing. He had to be. Christian had been with the professor, and if they had Christian, then surely they had Wilhelm too. Morello would have said so. No. He was lying. I clutched my bag tighter, my reason insisting he deceived me. Yet my hand went to my forehead, and I found myself taking a step towards him. He grunted in satisfaction. Good. Love is indeed stronger than fear. I do not love him, I said. He only grinned. Follow me. We left the room together, Clara shrinking back in the doorway. As I passed her, I snapped, See to your mistress, or you will answer to me. A sullen, defiant look twisted her face, but she was still a servant and would obey. Little Wotan sat watching, mournful-eyed, as I crossed the threshold. Outside, it was almost night. An unnatural dark had fallen, and with it a numinous fear, as if the laws of physics had slipped and some demonic hand were twisting creation to its own design. I knew it could not be this dark at such an hour, yet it was. Morello seemed untouched by the day's disappearance. He hailed a taxi with easy confidence. We climbed into the back. From my limited German, I gathered the driver was talking about the strange lack of daylight. Morello ignored him. I sat with my bag clutched tight on my knee, staring out of the window but seeing nothing. Everything was inward, and what I found there was fear. Not fear for myself, but fear for a foolish, drunken Frenchman. The gun Christian had given me was inside the bag. Even if Morello knew, he would likely think a well-brought-up young lady incapable of using it. Perhaps not in Italy, but in Hampshire we could shoot very well indeed. Shotguns and partridge had been my line. Semi-automatics and Italians should not prove too great a leap. We stopped outside a nondescript hotel on an ordinary Viennese street. I had no sense of where we were. The journey had passed in a kind of absence. The driver said something as he took his fare. I tried to disguise my anxiety while Morello paid. Morello said nothing as we entered the hotel. He was silent in the lobby, silent in the lift. On the third floor we stepped out into a corridor where a white-faced woman was walking towards us, another guest. She glanced at me oddly, almost sympathetically, as if she knew the terrible things that were about to happen. At the door of a room he turned the handle and pushed it open. He gestured for me to go in first. I looked through the half-open door. The lights were off. "You must be joking," I said. "After you." He only shrugged and walked in with easy confidence, as though escape were unthinkable. As he stepped across the threshold, I drew the pistol from my bag and pulled back the slide. The metallic snap made him turn his head. His expression was unreadable. Then, without a word, he went on inside. I lingered in the corridor, the door yawning open before me. My mouth was dry. I swallowed hard once, twice, as if that might loosen the knot in my throat. My hand tightened on the bag until my knuckles ached. If Christian was inside, unlikely but still possible, I couldn't leave him to whatever fate Morello had prepared. The gun weighed heavy in my hand. I told myself I was steady, though I could feel the faint tremor in my wrist. I drew a breath, held it, let it out slowly, the way one settles oneself before pulling a trigger. Then I straightened my back, one foot, then the other. That step across the threshold was the hardest I'd ever taken. But I took it. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. It was a medium-sized hotel room. The curtains were drawn, but there was little light outside in any case. Morello leaned over and lit a candle with his petrol cigarette lighter. It was a fat church candle, but black. "Rather a cliché," I said. He laughed softly. "Yes, but it amused me." "Put the gun away. It won't do you any good." "It could put a hole in you." He shook his head. I thought about shooting him just for that, but I managed to keep control of my sweating finger. My heart leapt around like a drunken man. I said, "Where is he?" "Who?" "He's not here at all, is he?" Morello grinned. "No, I lied. But there is someone you should meet." I turned to my right. Wrapped in shadow, lit only by the black candle, he stood, the lord of the flies, and flies crawled across his face. I had seen him once before in a church in London, but I had not known then what he was. At first he was as if dead, then horribly he lived again, a foul resurrection. His profile flickered before my eyes like frames on a cinema reel, each image vanishing before I could name it. An old man overlapped a youth, a middle-aged woman blurred into the corpse of a child. Each face lasted no more than a heartbeat, yet each carried the weight of 1,000,000 years. His finger guttered like a candle. He was all of them at once. He was none of us. I was in the presence of something inhuman, something godlike, something that did not belong within the walls of creation. He drank this world dry and became like wind, the prince of the air. The buzzing of flies filled my head. He twisted inward and outward, a cyclone made flesh, forcing me down, as if I were no more than a stalk of wheat. Who was I to stand before him? Who was I to be at all? I fell to my knees, retching, bile rising hot in my throat until my stomach emptied itself over the carpet. He spoke to me in my mother's voice, in my own voice, in my sister's voice. Life or death? And all at once my whole humanity rose before me. My stupid failed exams, the knee I once scraped, my favourite horse, the egg my father cooked that had been fertilised and full of blood. In that flood of memory I answered, my voice shaking, "You do not offer life or death, you offer living death, endless, undivided, watchful death, where I would observe but never be." My hands were wet with my own vomit. I stayed hunched on my knees, not daring to look at him, but instead turning to Morello. His face showed fear, horror, and jealousy. And in that moment I understood. He had craved the offer that had just been made to me, and it had been withheld from him. He, it, the fallen angel, stood there and seemed amused. The price of life is death. So then, death. He half turned as though glancing over his shoulder and spoke to someone hidden in the gloom. "It is time, my dear." And from the shadows that soaked that once ordinary room, a figure in white stepped forward. She was smiling, and when her crimson mouth opened in greeting, I saw it was lined with the teeth of an animal. "Hello, Tasmin." It was my dead sister, Margaret.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead come back?